Hello, everybody, and welcome into the Apples and Ginos Fantasy Hockey Podcast. My name is Nate Grutniblink. I'm the creator of Apples and Ginos, originator of the Zero G Draft Strategy, and in this podcast, I'm going to go over the most puzzling players league-wide as submitted by the Apples and Ginos Discord server. Let's get it. All right, welcome in, everybody. Unfortunately, this isn't live, so I don't get the pleasure of chatting with everyone tonight on YouTube live as we usually do for puzzling players, but I'm sure that we'll get into all these puzzling players, and actually maybe I'll get through a bit more of these puzzling players because of that. I'm just going to dive right in with the first one, Kevin Fiala. So Blake touched on this one in the flagship show yesterday. Shout out to Blake for holding down the fort the past two shows when I was unable to be on the podcast. Absolute stalwart work from my best friend and your friend. So thanks, Blake. Let's talk about Fiala. I'll give my take here. So Fiala's underlying metrics are not terrible. 60.5 minutes average time on ice, 91st in shots per 60, 94th in Corsi for per 60 over the last 5 games. So that's like, it's okay. It's passing. It's a passing grade, I guess you would say, right? He's playing on a line with Danault and Arvidsson in the last game, which was a little bit interesting. They did mix the lines around a little bit. Danault and Arvidsson also played with Moore. Fiala is still on the top power play, though, getting all of that deployment that he typically does get. On the season now, he's pacing for just 20 goals, 67 points. Definitely a far cry from what you thought you were getting when you drafted him. Yeah, I mean, the IPP at 73% is about in line with Fiala's normal numbers, but the shooting percentage just 9.3%. On ice shooting percentage 9.7%. Definitely do some positive regression there. It's a tough read, though, just because of the situation that LA is in and how hard it is to really and kind of decipher what this team is going to be going forward. They seem to take a step forward and then a step back kind of every other game. Cam Talbot came in and finally had a good game. Cost me one of my matchups, so thanks, Cam Talbot, for that, for finally figuring it out on the one night that you couldn't for my fantasy success. But yeah, it's a tough one, in my opinion, because I think that Fiala is plenty talented, easily can be a point per game player. It does seem like he is not shooting quite as much as he used to, and it does seem like the time on ice is being reduced just because of the depth that they have. And Victor Arvidsson, obviously, back in the fold now, that's creating even more depth that they have in that top 9 that they like to rotate so much. So I am adjusting expectations for Fiala, definitely. In one spot where I had Fiala, I moved him for Alex Ovechkin. I wonder how long ago that was now, maybe 6 to 8 weeks ago. And obviously I'm feeling pretty good about that at the moment, but we'll see. There's still lots left to be written. I'm definitely not panicking on Fiala. He's too talented to panic on him. I'm not going to try to sell him low. If you can find a reasonable offer for someone who is something like a 75-ish point player rest of season. If you can move Kevin Fiala for that, great. I just don't think that naturally exists, and so you're probably just left holding Fiala at this point. All right, next up, Juraj Slafkovsky. He's got 3 goals, 8 points in his last 5, averaging almost 21 minutes a night, 81st in shots per 60, 119th in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60, 14th in Corsi 4 per 60, 11th in scoring chances 4 per 60. Those are both really good numbers. And actually, Slafkovsky and Caulfield have better on-ice numbers than line mate Nick Suzuki, which, if you know anything about me and the Yang that I've talked on Nick Suzuki, you'll know that I derive some enjoyment from that fact. Obviously, I don't think that this is going to continue at this pace, but what's a realistic expectation for Slafkovsky moving forward? Definitely, he's taken some really big strides here in the last little bit, and I don't want to downplay that, but also it's one of these things that any player can get on a hot streak at any given time. Any line can get on a hot streak at any given time. And I need to see more before I'm like comfortable saying that Slavkovsky is going to be even like a 70-point player rest of season. I mean, I did say in one of the waiver wire episodes when he was still under 10% rostered on Yahoo, I said that one of these guys, there's three other guys. I think one of them was Zetterlund. It was Slavkovsky, Zetterlund, and then I can't remember the third one. Somebody will remind me. But yeah, I said one of these guys will probably end up just being that guy who scores at a 70-point pace rest of season. Right now, that looks like Slavkovsky. I wouldn't be shocked if he did continue at this pace, like 21 minutes a night. You're going to get every opportunity to score at an unbelievable rate if you're getting that kind of deployment, obviously. And they really don't have any reason to slow down on that unless he starts to play more poorly. He's still very young, which is kind of my primary concern with Slavkovsky is that, yes, he's very hot now. Obviously, the metrics are going to be a little bit unsustainable when he's running this hot, but it's also a scenario where it does seem like they've really found some chemistry because the underlying numbers, the on-ice numbers in particular for all three members of that line, Suzuki and Caulfield and Slavkovsky, is all looking really, really good. So it does feel like they've found something, they found chemistry, and it is working for real. But in a scenario on a team like that, these things can change very quickly. And I just don't want to get like totally married to the fact that Slavkovsky is now just the dude rest of season. So I'm preaching a little bit of caution there. If it was me and, I'm if I have a playoff team and I have Slavkovsky and I'm loving life and I'm cruising towards the playoffs, I'm probably looking to cash out on Slavkovsky, honestly. If somebody's willing to give me that, like point per game player for Slavkovsky at this point, if somebody really thinks that Slavkovsky is going to ride this all the way to the end and bring home the championship, then I'd absolutely love to cash out on Slavkovsky. I don't necessarily need Slavkovsky to win my championship if I'm already on a playoff trend, already on, like trending for a bye or something like that. I don't necessarily need Slavkovsky. What I really don't want to do is to just lose that. He goes to zero or, just kind of trends back towards streamer territory, goes cold for a bit. And now I've just lost out on what could have been. I could have had a trade window here to move Slavkovsky for someone who actually does make a difference for my playoff run. Like, can you move Slavkovsky for Ryan Nugent-Hopkins? I doubt it, but I'm sending that offer if I have Slavkovsky. All right, next up is John Tavares. Tavares did get into the game today against St. Louis, 4-2 win for the Leafs. Played 16:08, so they're definitely easing him in. He played on a line with, I think, Nick Robertson and Bobby McMahon, so yeah, definitely not his typical fare there, but definitely just easing him back in after the injury. Had 2 shots, a couple blocks. Nothing really to write home about for Tavares, but I am still pretty in on Tavares rest of season. I mean, if you're going out to acquire Tavares, I'd like to see him, just make sure that he gets back to what he was doing before, all these individual scoring chances for, all these shots per 60 that he's been getting all season long. Make sure the minutes come back, that they're not like trying to, kind of slow play him for the playoffs at this point or something like that. I don't think they will, but it is a concern that's in my mind. So if you are trying to acquire John Tavares, which I would recommend still, if somebody's out there willing to trade him, then I would just wait maybe a game or two more and just make sure that he gets back to normal deployment. He's getting the full complement of minutes, 18 plus minutes that we want to see before pulling the trigger on that. But all things told, the 24 goal, 63 point pace that he's on, I still think is very light. I think this is a guy who should be pacing for well over 30 goals, probably around a 70 point pace. 30 goals, 70 point pace feels pretty normal for John Tavares, given his metrics, which are just stellar on the season. Don't really have a reason to suppose that it'll get worse, really. So I think Tavares makes for a really good buy still if somebody in your league is willing to sell, but I would take a couple games just to make sure that everything's back to normal before I send that offer. Drake Batherson, just 1 assist his last 5 games, averaging just under 17 minutes a night. That's not ideal for Batherson, and what's really not ideal is the fact that his shots per 60, individual scoring chances for per 60 are both in the 300s for rank league-wide over this 5-game stretch, 238th and Corsi 4 per 60. It's just all like screaming red for Drake Batherson at this point. it really seems like Batherson is one of these players who is, just not meshing well with the new coach there at the moment. So that is really concerning. Obviously, they're kind of spreading the top 9 around right now in Ottawa, which is also a concern. Batherson's been demoted to what amounts to the second power play unit there as well. That's obviously a concern. So I do have concern now with Batherson where I didn't really before, just based on usage, really. Still think the talent is there. The shots per 60, individual scoring chances for per 60 in a 5-game stretch, I'm not too worried about. If it continues on, then maybe it's indicative of something greater. Maybe he has like a real beef with the coach and he's sulking. I don't know anything about Batherson to say whether he's that kind of player, but there's any number of reasons why players go through extended droughts. And so for this to not continue that way, I really need to see Batherson, elevate himself to where he's playing with, right now he's playing with Josh Norris and Ridley Greig, which is just not where you want to be, and not playing on the top power play unit, not getting those minutes. That's where Batherson really needs to be super fantasy relevant. On the season, he's pacing for 27 goals, 63 points, which I think is a good level for Batherson, definitely. I think he's capable of even more, given even more minutes, but it really doesn't seem likely that he's going to get that kind of deployment moving forward. And honestly, 17 kind of feels like the ceiling, given just the fact that they're running a top 9. He's on the second power play unit, more or less. That really is starting to concern me with Drake Batherson. I'm not sure what you can really do with them. If you can move off him still for someone who is a similar player, maybe a similar season-long point pace, 63-point pace, and you can move off to that player, but who has a more solidified role moving forward, then definitely I'd explore that option, because I do think that there's a pretty solid chance now that Drake Batherson kind of wilts here in the back half if this kind of trend of deployment continues that has kind of happened for the last number of games at this point. Next up, Kyle Connor, 1 goal, 4 assists, 5 points in his last 5 games, so he's cruising. 20 minutes average time on ice. Now, I should check, because I think this request might have been made before the game today, and I think Kyle Connor ran into a couple points today, a couple power play assists, so nice day for Kyle Connor. And definitely before this point, he had been cold for a good extended stretch. He had a stretch where he had 5 points without a game, then scored a goal, another 2 games without a point, had 2 assists, and then had 2 assists again. The interesting part here is the shots have kind of gone away. 216th in shots per 60 last 5, but 60th still in individual scoring chances for per 60. So I'm not overall that concerned about Kyle Connor on the season, pacing for 42 goals, 75 points. I honestly still feel like that might be a little light. I think this is a guy who can be 45 plus and push for a point per game at the NHL level, especially skating 20 minutes a night, which he's done pretty much all season. So overall, I'm pretty in on Kyle Connor. Obviously, if you're interested in acquiring Connor, then you're going to have to check out your playoff schedule. He doesn't have the greatest playoff schedule depending on which weeks your playoffs are, so definitely check those out. Actually, Winnipeg does have one of the worst schedules, kind of no matter what your no matter what your fantasy playoffs are, so he's not really a great target just for that reason alone. But overall, I mean, if you're pushing to get into the playoffs, then maybe Kyle Connor does make a lot of sense. You got to make the playoffs for the playoff schedules to matter. So maybe the current Kyle Connor manager was a little bit peeved and sees this couple of 2 assist games as a good jumping off point on Kyle Connor. If that's the case, then by all means, I would go ahead and jump in on a Kyle Connor trade. I just don't think that that's necessarily most people's evaluation of the player. He's been just a steady player for so long at this point that I think there's going to be a pretty level-headed approach to him by whoever his current manager is. Next up, Matt Zuccarello. So Zuccarello had been very cold, and then this wild game today. Absolutely insane. 10-7, the Minnesota Wild beat the Vancouver Canucks today. And Zuccarello had a goal and 3 assists, all for power play points. That's just wild stuff from Matt Zuccarello for sure. And I mean, the Zucchini Man is somebody that we expect to be able to put up some points. Definitely it's hurt him a lot that Matt Boldy has gotten on the top line, and Matt Boldy, Kirill Kaprizov, and Joel Eriksson Ek have absolutely gone off together in the last little bit. And so that's really held down Matt Zuccarello and, yeah, just his usage overall. Zuccarello is still on the top power play unit, so he's still valuable for that reason alone. Still skating 18.5 minutes on average through this 5-game stretch. The on-ice numbers still look really good. 13th in Corsi 4/60, 4th in scoring chances 4/60 on the season, pacing for 18 goals, 78 points, so a ton of assists as per usual for him. I do think that maybe he converts a few more to goals, but I do think we have to, just adjust our expectations because of how well this experiment of Boldy on the top line with Jeek and Kaprizov is going. I do think that the most likely case at this point in time anyway is that Zuccarello plays on the second line rest of season, and his usage for fantasy is a lot more tied to the power play than it had been previously, and that's obviously going to bring down his point potential moving forward, probably more into the 60 to 65 point range moving forward, which may or may not be super useful to you depending on the depth of your league. So it's a case of adjusting expectations with Zuccarello. If you can sell him off this hot game as, still like a point per game guy, Zuccarello has kind of just always been routinely undervalued, so I don't know if you can actually do that. In some cases, it may just be best to hold on to Zuccarello and ride it out because he is going to provide you decent coverage, and he may get back on the top line with Kaprizov, and then maybe he recovers some of that point potential that he's lost at the moment. But overall, I think that we do just have to be a little bit more aware of the current situation with Zuccarello, and that it's the most likely scenario in my mind is for sure that it's going to continue the way that it is, and Zuccarello trends back towards being more of a 60 to 65 point player rest of season. Next up, Artturi Lehkonen, 3 goals, 3 assists, 6 points in his last 5, averaging just over 19.5 minutes a night. Lehkonen has definitely made an impression since his return to the Colorado lineup. He is not playing on the top line currently, so he's playing on a line with Ross Colton and Miles Wood. I don't hate that, to be honest with you. Ross Colton is obviously somebody that I'm into. He's still on the top power play, though, crucially, which is obviously where Lehkonen can go to work and has gone to work in the past, in past seasons for Colorado. 208th in shots per 60, 120th in individual scoring chances, 4/60. Those numbers are definitely not exceptional by any stretch of the imagination, but that's kind of the player that Lehkonen is. He's never been an extreme shots per 60 or scoring chance producing player. It's really been more about, can he get that exposure to McKinnon, Rantanen, Makar, and can he capitalize on it? So I definitely think that he's doing that at the moment. He's hot at the moment. Like right now, he's played 21 games on the season, and he's pacing for 23 goals, 59 points, and that feels kind of on the nose to me a little bit. I wouldn't be shocked if that's kind of where he ended up. I do think you're just going to have to ride the waves with Lehkonen. If you want to keep on with him, he's going to have times where he's on the top line with Rantanen and McKinnon, and you're going to be loving life, and then he's going to go down the lineup, maybe get even off the top power play, and then you're going to be hating life, and you're just going to have to live with the ups and downs. It's kind of a player that's hard to deal with in that way, especially if the downs come in your fantasy playoffs, but that is the kind of player that I view Lehkonen as, where it's really just going to depend what his upside is week to week based on where he's playing in the lineup, and Colorado is one of those teams that will move the lineup around a lot. Next up, Josh Morrissey. He's only got 2 assists in his last 5, actually only 3 points, all assists in his last 10 games. You have to go back to January 9th to find his last goal. 74th in shots per 60 amongst all defensemen, 46th in individual scoring chances, 4/60, 55th in Corsi, 4/60, 14th in on-ice scoring chances, 4/60. Still skating 24 plus, still that guy for Winnipeg for sure. On the season now, pacing for 11 goals, 56 points, and 46% IPP, 5.3% shooting percentage, 10.1% on ice shooting percentage. Yeah, I mean, I feel like Morrissey is a 55 to 60 point player probably. When the Jets were hot earlier, it felt like Morrissey probably had a ceiling beyond that, and maybe that's not the case now that the Jets have gone cold a little bit. So yeah, take that for what it's worth. I think that Morrissey is kind of locked in, though, as that guy. And so, whether he's scoring at a 55-point pace rest of the season or a 65-point pace, the actual difference to your lineup is probably going to be fairly negligible. Anyone can go on a hot streak or anyone can get cold from this point out. I don't really see anything necessarily to suggest that, he's playing injured or there's something else going on. It's just the team has been cold, and so Morrissey himself has been a little bit cold. I'm definitely not panicking. If you want to try to move off him and you can move laterally, then I'm never going to hate on that. Like at this time of the season, right, if you can move from a cold player to a player who's producing right now, then that is going to feel like a win a lot of the time, as long as the player that's producing right now is producing semi-sustainably as well. So don't hate that. Obviously, Morrissey suffers from the same bad playoff schedule as Kyle Connor, so maybe you are trying to move off of him for that reason. And maybe you do want to go out and get that done. But again, I wouldn't move off of Morrissey for just like any random 45 to 50 point defenseman. Like I'm not moving him for Devin Taves or anything crazy like that. There's just, he's still in that echelon of defenseman for me where his role is so locked down. He could get hot at any minute. He's just kind of locked in, like top 20 fantasy asset at defense for me, if not higher. So I just don't feel any real type of way about Morrissey, quite honestly. If you can get a deal done that's equivalent value, that gets you better for the playoffs, and that's where you're at in your season, then more power to you. But I'm definitely not panic selling Josh Morrissey. Next up, Corey Perry. So Corey Perry has become a hot topic all of a sudden just by virtue of playing on a line with McDavid. I don't know if you've heard of him. Apparently he's pretty good at hockey. A couple days now that Perry's been on the McDavid plus Draisaitl line. So obviously that's a terrific spot to be. That's exactly where you want to be for scoring fantasy points. He has scored now 2 goals and 1 assist for 3 points his last 5. In the game on Saturday there, 16:39 time on ice, goal and an assist, 3 shots, 2 hits. So it was looking pretty nice. 6-3 win against Arizona today. Nothing but a couple of shots and skated only 12:43. So that's kind of the edge of the sword that you're living by if you're picking up Corey Perry. He can definitely have a night. It's really just like Zach Kassian all over again when Zach Kassian was a thing in Edmonton. Whoever's playing with McDavid and Draisaitl, I mean, you can stream them for a little bit, and you have to be prepared, though, that these guys may only get like 12 minutes, and it may go absolutely nowhere. Corey Perry, at this stage in his career, is definitely not somebody that you need to be hanging on to and expecting big things from. He can definitely still put the puck in the net when it's handed to him by somebody like McDavid, so he's maybe better than like the rest of the bottom 6 in Edmonton, if that's the bar you're trying to set. But for fantasy purposes, yeah, I'm not expecting Corey Perry to be really anything more. Like on the season, he's pacing for 21 goals, 44 points. That feels like the player he could be well on the top line with McDavid. So I'm definitely not expecting anything major from Corey Perry moving forward. You can stream him when he's there. Make sure you get off him when he's not. Next up, Thomas Harley. Obviously, we're huge fans of Thomas Harley here on the podcast. We've been talking him up for quite some time. 2 goals, 5 points his last 5. Miro Heiskanen was out of the game today. He and his wife just welcomed, I believe it was a baby girl. So congratulations to Miro Heiskanen and his wife. And so that obviously meant that Thomas Harley got to play some coveted top power play minutes with Dallas, and he did pick up an assist. It wasn't on the power play, but did pick up an assist, couple shots, 5 blocks, skated 29 minutes and 13 seconds today, did Thomas Harley. Just a terrific player. He had an 8-shot game a while ago. Just wild stuff from Thomas Harley. 11th in shots per 60 in the last 5, 3rd in individual scoring chances 4 per 60. That's actually pretty indicative of a really good thing from Thomas Harley. I always say that I don't really penalize defensemen if they don't have great individual scoring chance for marks, because a lot of defensemen, just by virtue of the system that they play, they're really only allowed to take shots from the blue line or take slap shots on the power play or something like that. But it really does seem like Harley is being given a green light, and he's taking advantage of it and joining the play and being a dangerous player around the net, which is really exciting for fantasy purposes. On the season, pacing for 22 goals, 53 points. I do think that the 13.6% shooting percentage is definitely going to come down. Maybe it should be like half that, maybe a little higher. Maybe he's that efficient with the scoring chance generation that he's proven so far. But yeah, this is probably more a guy who should be in the 10 to 15 goal range rather than the 22 goal pace that he's on currently. But regardless, I mean, that's still very good for a defenseman. And the 53-point pace, he's got a 49% IPP and a 12.1% on-ice shooting percentage. But really, the ice time on the season, on average, is still just over 20 minutes. He's been playing much more than that recently. And so I do kind of feel like the 53-point pace, even without top power play minutes, is probably something that we might expect from Harley, quite honestly. Throughout every season from this point onward, whenever Heiskanen's injured, he's going to be on the top power play. Honestly, he might be more offensively talented than Heiskanen. I know a lot of people are going to recoil in shock when they hear me say that, but Heiskanen has always been a bit more of a volume guy than an efficiency guy. And Harley, I mean, it's one season, it's small sample sizes, all of the usual caveats, but Harley has looked very, very good under the hood this season, and especially in the last 2 to 3 months. So very big fan of Thomas Harley, very big fan of his moving forward. If Heiskanen were to go down with injury, Harley would be probably a top 10 fantasy defenseman for me rest of season. Next up, Mackenzie Weegar, who's got 3 goals, 1 assist, 4 points in his last 5. About 22 minutes average time on ice here. 9th in shots per 60, 34th in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60. 41st in Corsi, 4 per 60, 74th in on-ice scoring chances, 4 per 60 through these 5 games. So Mackenzie Weegar, again, pacing for 22 goals, again with a 10.9% shooting percentage. That's probably going to come down. Definitely not something he's done at any point before in the past. But what's interesting about Weegar, and it was mentioned when his name was brought up in the Apples and Geos Discord server, is the fact that, Hanifin is currently manning the top power play. Probably to inflate his trade value as they look at potentially trading him. And if Hanifin is traded, then Mackenzie Weegar very well could be the new top power play defenseman there in Calgary. They've kind of rotated through different players. Actually, I'm seeing today that they actually did use Weegar on the top power play in the game against the Jets. So there you go. That's new information for me. And he did get an assist there. So it looks like things went all right. So that's pretty interesting for Weegar specifically. If Hanifin goes away, then Weegar probably runs more on even strength minutes rather. And so I do think that there's potentially a ceiling here for Weegar that could be really nice. His shots this year have come back in a big way, where last year, they were just nowhere to be found. Maybe it's a coaching thing there last year, but this year he's completely blossomed. I don't know if I can reasonably expect a much higher point pace. He's on pace for 48 points right now on the season. I don't know if I can reasonably expect too much higher, but you would expect that there would be, if he does stick on top power play, which is, a big if. They've got Rasmus Andersson there too, could come back in and take over that spot. It's been mostly his for the past 3 years there in Calgary. So that could happen as well. But it is intriguing to think about what could be with Mackenzie Weegar, especially because of that massive shot volume. And obviously the fact that Weegar is an absolute hits and blocks monster, along with all of that huge peripheral stud in all categories, just crushing it this year. And so if he does get power play time, that could really elevate his value. In banger leagues, he could be like a top 5 defenseman for sure if he got power play 1 rest of season. So I don't know if there's a major takeaway from there. Maybe you want to send out some speculative trades for him, but I think his current manager is probably hanging on for dear life on Mackenzie Weegar, just given how productive he's been already this season. Next up, Adrian Kempe, 2 goals, 4 points in his last 5, 19 minutes average time on ice, 48th in shots per 60 in the last 5 games, 165th in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60, which is, not ideal, definitely for a guy of Kempe's caliber. 176th in Corsi, 4 per 60, 187th in scoring chances, 4 per 60, so the on-ice numbers not looking too hot there either. Still obviously attached to Anze Kopitar, still obviously on the top power play in Los Angeles there. So on the season now, Kempe is pacing for 29 goals, 73 points. He's kind of kept up the point pace, but not managed to keep up the goal pace from last year, which is kind of interesting. I do think that probably he should be in line for a few more goals moving forward, but he might be in line for a few less assists. Maybe that all kind of cancels out, and you get a little bit better version of Adrian Kempe. This is a guy who's still skating 19 minutes. It feels like he may be one of the very few people in Los Angeles, along with guys like Anze Kopitar and Drew Doughty, that are kind of immune to the top 9 thing that's going on in LA, where they're just kind of spreading out some ice time. So Adrian Kempe, I feel like, is a relatively safe place to make a bet for the rest of the season. The only thing that would give you some pause here is what is going on in Los Angeles. Are they going to figure it out once again rest of season? Does this just become like a really toxic environment and everybody really kind of goes down the drain and the scoring dries up even more? Anze Kopitar, maybe he declines in the back half of whatever season this is. What is he, age 37 now? You could tell yourself some stories about how Kempe doesn't perform rest of season, but I feel like those are stories and those are kind of narratives, and definitely not what I would consider the most likely scenario moving forward. All right, Nikolai Ehlers is next up. Just 1 assist in his last 5 games. That's not great, and his minutes have fallen off in a big way, which is really, it's really disheartening to see. I want to shout out at Mango Snapple T on Twitter, who tagged me and Blake on a quote from Rick Bowness about what needs to happen for Ehlers and Perfetti to get more ice time. Basically, Bowness didn't hold back. He said, they're spending too much time in our zone. They're not even generating offense on a consistent basis. They're not getting the puck managed through the neutral zone. He's saying it's up to them. They gotta figure it out. We're not giving people ice time here. So, that's the situation with Ehlers. And so, this is a guy who's still going to generate shots, 36th in shots per 60 over the last 5, 30th on the season. He still does that and does that in spades. But, it does seem like he's back in the doghouse at the moment. So, I don't know if Ehlers is a guy that you should really be hopeful for rest of season. Again, with Winnipeg, you're looking at a not so great playoff schedule, so that doesn't help either. If you're looking for a drop, as somebody to sign off on you dropping Ehlers, I do think you can drop Ehlers. He can make you feel bad about that in a couple weeks. We saw what he could do when he was up on the top line, more by necessity than by anything else with the injuries they had. But with Monahan now, that does provide another impediment to top power play time. And so I think that the road to Ehlers being a significant fantasy producer has gotten a lot harder since Monahan arrived as well. And so, at this point in the season, you're kind of pulling out all the stops. I do think you can drop Nikolai Ehlers if you need to. I'm actually streaming Ehlers. Somebody dropped Ehlers, and I'm streaming him for this week because Winnipeg has a decent streaming schedule this week. We'll see how it goes. I don't know how it'll go. Just kind of betting on the talent, I guess, to shine through, maybe even reduced ice time. But I am not, married to Ehlers after this week. I'm going to evaluate what happened this week after the fact. And, if he didn't perform, if the ice time is remaining the same, if Bowness is still saying the same things, then I'll definitely be dropping him once again. Alex DeBrincat, 1 goal, 3 assists, 4 points in his last 5 here. He's skating on average just over 16 and a half minutes time on ice through this stretch. The last 2 games have been a little bit more concerning, 14:05 and 15:14. That's definitely not something you want to see from a guy that you're really hoping was going to be a big part of your team. He's playing on a line with JT Compher and Lucas Raymond, which is not helping. He's on the power play unit with Kane, Fabry, and Sprong right now. I'd prefer to see him attached to Larkin, who I still think is their best offensive player, but they're kind of splitting the power play there, which is again, not the way that I would do it, or most good coaches in the NHL are doing it, but that's the way that's happening over there in Detroit currently, and you have to kind of adjust your expectations accordingly. 191st in shots per 60, those metrics are no good. 136th in Corsi 4 per 60, 123rd in scoring chances 4 per 60. That doesn't feel good either. I still think DeBrincat is a perfectly fine player, probably in perfect settings, the way that he should be used. A 40-goal, 75-point player, year in and year out should be what Alex DeBrincat is. But if he's going to be used like this, then the bottom can really fall out in a big way. Like, JT Compher is not an offensive force. Lucas Raymond is, probably a second line winger on a good team. And so that's really just forcing DeBrincat to totally carry something. It doesn't feel like he's completely up to that at the moment, and he's not getting, enough ice time to really shine. I mean, he's got 4 points in his last 5, so he's making do with what he's got. But definitely my outlook for DeBrincat moving forward is a lot lower than it was at the beginning of the season. I do think that there's, a case where he could be like a 25 goal, 60-point player rest of season that you're just like, okay, he was on my team. If he's got more value than that in your league, then definitely you could entertain the idea of potentially shopping him, and I wouldn't blame you for doing that. I don't think that I'm just double checking, but I don't think the Detroit Red Wings have really a terrific schedule at any point. So I don't think that you're really going to lose out on anything if you move on from DeBrincat. If you can get somebody who is a 70-plus point player who feels a little bit more entrenched, and you can trade him to somebody who wants to swing on DeBrincat, getting that top line, top power play with a bullet, 19-plus minutes a night, rest of season kind of deployment back, that could happen, but it's not something I'm willing to bet on with my teams, especially my playoff teams where I'm looking for some consistency heading to the playoffs. Jason Robertson and Roope Hintz make the list here. So I'll double check what they did in the game today, but in the last 5, Robertson has 1 goal, 4 assists for 5 points, and Roope Hintz has 1 goal, 2 assists for 3 points in those 5 games. They both had 1 assist in the game today. Robertson skating almost 19.5 minutes a night. Hintz skating about 18. Neither of them have great underlying metrics. Robertson 181st in shots per 60. Roope Hintz 296th. That's not good. Individual scoring chances for metrics are worse for both of them, so that's not any better. Corsi 4 per 60 in the hundreds. Scoring chances 4 per 60. 167 for Jason Robertson, 215 for Roope Hintz. Not good numbers the last little bit, but they're good enough to produce even when they're not generating a lot of chances, and that's what they've been doing. So on the season now, like Jason Robertson pacing for only 26 goals, which is wild, but still 82 points, so he's just kind of converted a lot of his goal scoring to assists this year. Roope Hintz, 35 goals, 76 points. I think that realistically, I'm still in on both these players. I still think there's probably a little bit of ceiling beyond this for both these players at these levels. I do think that you could go out and acquire these guys if you wanted to, but again, this is not a team with a great playoff schedule, so do take that into account. From week 24 onward, their playoff schedule is one of the worst in the league. So take that into account. That's not going to help you out much at all if you're going to the playoffs with these guys. So maybe it's a good time to get off them. I'm not reading too much into the fact that their underlying metrics have been not great the last, 5 games. That can happen in a 5-game stretch. These are both basically star players in the NHL that I'm pretty confident in rest of season. But if you are looking for an off point, then this may be it. And you may want to, just explore what you can get for these guys on the open market. Brad Marchand has 3 assists in his last 5 games, averaging 20 minutes a night, so he's definitely getting that deployment. 104th in shots per 60, which again I would call like a passing grade, and 128th in individual scoring chances 4 per 60, 71st in Corsi 4 per 60, 56th in scoring chances 4 per 60 on the season, pacing for 37 goals, 75 points. Ageless wonder a little bit here with Brad Marchand. 66% IPP, 16.8% shooting percentage. He's always been an efficient shooter. 12.4% on-ice shooting percentage. I don't think that any of those metrics are insane for Marchand. Maybe the shooting percentage is a touch high, but it's not too crazy for me. The last little bit has definitely not been as great. He's got, as I mentioned, he's got just 3 assists in his last 5 games. He's got just 1 goal in his last 8. So there is that. But, right before that, he had 5 goals in 4 games. So there's that as well. I'm not too concerned, honestly, about Brad Marchand. I think he is what he is. He's going to get plenty of minutes. He's going to produce at this, 75-point pace. Maybe the goals come down a little bit, but probably the assists come up to match it. I'm really kind of unconcerned with Brad Marchand overall. I think this is the player that he is, and you should expect nothing less. I don't have a strong take on what you should do with Marchand, I guess. I think he's probably just a hold if you got him. I doubt you can trade him for more than he's worth, especially with the recent stretch where he hasn't scored much. But, I think that Marchand is a perfectly fine player and going to be a valuable contributor to your fantasy lineup. All right, the last player that was requested was Josh Norris. 1 goal, 1 assist, 2 points in his last 5, averaging just over 17.5 minutes a night, 174th in shots per 60, 224th in individual scoring chances 4 per 60. Basically, like similar to Drake Batherson, but better, I guess is what I'd say. So he's kind of, been higher than Batherson, but still not great. And realistically, he hasn't lived up to, some of the good underlying metrics that he's shown in previous seasons, which had me kind of excited about him as a potential 30-goal, 60-point guy at the start of the season. On the season, he's paced for 24 goals, 48 points, 60% IPP, 11.9% shooting percentage, 8.7% on ice shooting percentage. Obviously, the 8.7% on ice shooting percentage should rebound, so that should come up. But again, as I mentioned, he's right now skating on that kind of third line with Batherson, who's as cold as it gets, and Ridley Greig. That's not great. I think that Norris is just a streamer at this point, unless he starts to really turn things up. I've been kind of waiting. We've had flashes of him, heating up with the underlying metrics coming back, but they've always cooled off again. It does seem like he's being, his role's being reduced a little bit from where it typically had been in the past. That obviously caps his upside for fantasy as well. So I'm kind of just viewing Norris as a streamer and not much more for the rest of the season, which is tough because I do like the player. All right, that concludes all the specific players that were highly requested in the Discord server. But I do want to jump to just a few questions I thought were kind of interesting that I wanted to touch on here. Wow, Woobus asked one, said, "Hey, Date, first off, hope you're having an awesome day, man." Thanks, man. Appreciate that. In a banger league, banger keeper league, who would you keep of these 3? Barkov, Tage, Svetch. Leaning Svetch as he's 23, absolutely elite in category coverage. Also isn't even in his prime yet. Excited to see what that looks like. Who would you choose? What metrics would make you choose that? So for me, I would probably, with keepers, I'm always looking at floor. I'm really trying to take the player that I think has the highest floor, and for me, that's Barkov. He's on pace for 90 points this season, and I think he's shooting 9%, and he's on pace for 90 points this season. I think that Barkov is an elite center in the league and probably a guy who should be pacing for 100 points if he just got some positive variance a little bit more. So I really like Barkov there. I just really want to just solidify my top end keepers. I want to be absolutely sure that this guy's a stud. Svechnikov is interesting. He says he's 23. I get that he's 23, but he's going to have played 400 NHL games by the end of the season. He's kind of been the exact same player for the last few seasons. Actually, this season, his shot rates and individual scoring chance for rates are down from previous seasons. He's really being buoyed by the highest shooting percentage of his career and the play of the team around him, which is always good in Carolina. So you can feel like that's somewhat sustainable. But you also have, unless you're projecting Rod Brind'Amour to get fired there, then you do kind of feel like it's most likely that Svechnikov doesn't see much more than the 17 minutes on average that he's seen this season. So there is that kind of ceiling there for Svech as well. Tage Thompson is kind of the upside play, obviously. I do think that I'm still in on Tage Thompson. I still think that maybe it's not this season. Maybe there's just something that's broken there in Buffalo and needs to be fixed. But I do think that this is a player who's shown the metrics and kind of replicated things to the point where I'm confident that this is a player who can score 50 goals and push 100 points in the National Hockey League at some point. So I do like Tage Thompson a lot for that reason. He's obviously going to have huge shot numbers as well. Those shot numbers have come back up in the last little bit. 16th in shots per 60 over the last 5, 22nd on the year in shots per 60 as well. So I love Tage Thompson as well, but I think I'm just defaulting to the safest player there, who's Alexander Barkov, in my opinion. Svechnikov this year, even with the super shooting percentage, is only pacing for 30 goals, 77 points. Obviously, he hits a ton, which is really valuable, but I don't know if it's enough, just given the fact that I feel like this is a ceiling season almost from Svechnikov in this Carolina situation that he finds himself in. The fact that he's 23 really doesn't enter into my process at all. I'm really just trying to have the best keeper every single year, and I'll let the ages kind of fall where they may. What if Svech has a terrible year next year and you're kicking yourself and you're dropping him for a different keeper after that? So the age really doesn't factor into this at all for me. The other one here was, I assume the answer is no, but do we know anything about Big Val Nichushkin? Yeah, we don't, and that's for good reason. Obviously, he's in the NHLPA player assistance program, and basically whenever a player's in there, they kind of close the door on any questions or anything about that, because obviously they want to respect the player's privacy, which is great. I'm glad that they do that. But yeah, for that reason, I don't think you're ever going to hear anything about Nichushkin basically until he's back. And so, yeah, it's just a big guessing game with Nichushkin for fantasy purposes, whether he's useful or not. If you want my take, I guess you could hold on and just hope that he does come back, and you could see what he nets you in the open market, but everybody else is going to have the same worries, so I don't think he nets you anything that's really all that useful. Maybe, if you need just like one more, just above streamer level player to kind of push you through and get you to the playoffs if you're scrapping for a playoff spot, maybe that's a route that you want to go. That's definitely a possibility, so you could go that route if you can get that for Nichushkin, but yeah, in general, you can't expect anything from Nichushkin or to have any kind of indication on when he'll be back with any kind of notice, in my opinion. And then Ground Beef asked, was the calf implant procedure painful? Are you wearing capri pants all the time now? So yeah, Blake made up some really good stories as to why I was missing on the podcast over the weekend. The real reason was I've been kind of deathly ill. My whole family got a wild virus and I think a cold on top of that. I've had a fever for 5 straight days, including today. It's been exciting to say the least, but it's not been great. So the calf implants, it sounds painful. That's not something I'll be going after anytime soon. I already wear capri pants all the time anyway, so what are we even talking about there? Anyway, that's gonna be it for this one. Hopefully brought you some value. Helped you get a little bit better at fantasy hockey today. All the advanced stats you heard today came from Natural Stat Trick, terrific free resource. If you haven't heard, many thanks to the band there for supplying music for the podcast. Be sure to check out their Spotify as well. And that's it, folks. Much love.